Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel and welcome to the first movie review of 2025. I still have some reviews from last year to make, like A Complete Unknown and Mufasa. You know, life happens, but I'm going to try to get those out in the next couple of weeks. Today I'm giving you my thoughts on Den of Thieves 2 Pantera. Now, I just watched the first one like a couple days ago in preparation for this, and I'll be honest, I thought it was one of the most blatant ripoffs of Heat that I have ever seen. Sure, it's competently made and it's not like Heat owns the bank robbery genre, but all of the strengths that the first Den of Thieves had, those being gritty, realistic violence and tense cop and robber throwdowns, all of those strengths it owes to the movie Heat. And it's weird that we're just now getting a sequel 7 years later, and you can definitely tell that it's been 7 years, because both of these lead actors have put on a few pounds, and I'm sorry, I just have to point it out because it's very noticeable. Big Nick is back, once again played by Gerard Butler, and he's still tracking down Donnie after all of these years, after his heist in the first film. But this time, the two of them find that their goals aren't that far apart, and so they actually team up to this time rob the World Diamond Center. I like Gerard Butler in just about every movie that he's in. He does have a very distinct screen presence, and I love his sarcasm in these films. He plays the sleazy, non-by-the-books cop so well. With that said, one of my biggest problems with the first Den of Thieves was a general lack of character depth. Everyone, and I mean every character in that film, was a complete and total asshole, and for the most part, you don't get any insight as to why they're acting the way they do. I'll give this sequel some praise for at least partially solving that problem. There's a sequence around halfway through the film in which Nick and Donnie sit down, and through this conversation that they have, not only do they start to connect a little bit on some sort of a human level, but you also learn their motivations. You learn why Nick operates the way he does and why Donnie continues to plan heists, even despite his big score in the previous film. Yes, there is a crew of secondary characters that they pull together to carry out this heist, but I mean, let's be real, we're mostly focusing on these two characters. Everybody else is just either cannon fodder or, you know, very paper thin with very little characterization. If there's one thing that this film does better than the first one, I think the humanization of these two lead characters and the dynamic between them was more interesting, even though I find it to be pretty unrealistic. And as much as I enjoy the presence that Gerard Butler brings to the table, even when his character might not be as deep as I want him to be, O'Shea Jackson Jr. is very expressionless. I find him to be such a boring actor. I suppose it might be a little cliche to jump on the Nepo baby hate train, but I don't know, I find him to be a very vapid screen presence, especially when you compare him to Butler, who is totally carrying the weight of a lot of these scenes. Moving back into the positives, I at least respect that as a sequel, this film is not trying to one-up the first one. It is not a carbon copy of that first film, and it doesn't feel like a Heat ripoff. It does take the story in a relatively new direction, albeit a direction that a lot of people might not care for. As I'm sitting here thinking about it, there actually is a sequence in an elevator shaft that reminds me a lot of Ocean's 11, but this never felt like a direct ripoff of another film to me. And it does feel larger in scope than the first film, given that we're in Europe. We see a lot of big, large-scale European landscapes. Even if the action itself isn't bigger, it's just the scope of the film is largely felt on what I assume is a relatively small budget. And I think it's important to note that there's not much action either until the third act, and that's not necessarily something that I disliked about it, because I enjoyed the more human level that we connect to some of these characters on. And another pro to that first film, I think, is for a first-time director, I forget his name, but the guy that directed this movie, I think he does a good job once again. I just like the way that he approaches the violence. It feels very grounded, dirty. When people are using firearms, you feel the weight of that. When two cars collide, there's a momentum to it. Another commonality that this has with the first film, and unfortunately this one is doing it zero favors, it's way too long. There's no reason that this needed to be 2.5 hours long. It drags a significant amount in the first hour or so, and the ending, I have a lot to say about the ending, but there were about at least three points during which I thought, okay, it's wrapping up now, the movie's probably about to end, and then it kept on going and going, and it just tacked on a bunch of endings that serve no purpose beyond baiting us into coming back for a potential sequel. Even though the pacing drags at times, I think the story is also extremely bloated. They try to incorporate the mafia into the fray during the heist while they're trying to steal these diamonds, and they become more of a larger player in the third act. It's just unnecessarily long, and there's a twist towards the end. I kind of figured there would be because the first one has a twist as well. And it was so predictable. It also kind of makes the characters look like morons. The fact that they didn't see what happens coming, that's about as much as I can say without spoiling it. And the script as a whole isn't anything special. Again, I appreciate the attempt at humanizing the main two characters, but most of the dialogue is pretty bad. There's an interrogation scene at the beginning that I could not take seriously because of the way that characters were talking. It was very goofy. So as someone who thought that the first Den of Thieves was pretty mediocre, nothing special, nothing that I hated, it had some strong elements and some very weak elements that sort of balance each other out. I feel very similarly about this one. I think it fixes some of the first film's problems, but also introduces its own problems, and some of the other issues carry over from the first one, being that it's way too long. I just feel like so many people will find themselves getting bored, especially with how slow the pacing is at times. But I think the most I can say about this is that if you really enjoyed the first film for its characters and want to see where they might take them in a sequel, you'll probably like this one too. Otherwise, I would stay clear. I'm going to give Den of Thieves 2 Pantera 2.5 stars. Not exactly a magnificent start to the year, but you know what? I think it was a little better than I was expecting, and at least it's not Night Swim, because I think that's what we opened with last year, and God, that film was just atrocious. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. As always, I do encourage you to drop your thoughts on both films, the first and second one, down into the comments so I can hear what you have to say. And also be sure to hit that like button as well as subscribe while you're at it. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.